What's going on, everybody? Khaleep's Tech here, coming back at you with another video. In this video, we're going to be doing a quick comparison between the Motorola Moto G Stylus 5G 2022 and the Samsung Galaxy A53 5G. Now before we go any further, as always, I do want to remind you to go ahead and hit that subscribe button, and if you want to learn more about either of these phones individually, I will be linking to several other videos about them in the description, as well as some information about pricing and availability. But with that being said, let's get started. So with the Moto G Stylus 5G, we're getting a 6.8-inch 120Hz IPS LCD display with a resolution of 1080p, a PPI of 395, an aspect ratio of 20.5:9, and an 85.8% screen-to-body ratio. With the Samsung Galaxy A53 5G, we're getting a 6.5-inch 120Hz Super AMOLED display with a resolution of 1080p, a PPI of 405, an aspect ratio of 20:9, and an 85.4% screen-to-body ratio. So both phones have really good displays, and each of them has a couple advantages. First of all, with the Moto G Stylus 5G, obviously this display is much larger, and this tends to be a huge advantage when you're doing stuff like watching videos, playing games, and that kind of stuff. And in addition to this, with a 20.5:9 aspect ratio versus 20:9, the Moto G Stylus 5G is getting a taller and more narrow form factor. So with this phone, if you're doing something in landscape mode like streaming a video, for example, you're going to get a much more immersive experience. And if you're doing something like reading an article or scrolling through social media, you can fit more content on the screen without having to scroll as much. On the other hand, with the Samsung Galaxy A53 5G, while the size and dimensions aren't quite as good as the Moto G Stylus 5G, this phone is a little bit more compact, and I know a lot of people out there don't like to have a really large phone. So if you want something that's a little bit smaller while still having the benefits of having a larger display, the Samsung Galaxy A53 5G might be a little bit better for you. In addition to this, with a Super AMOLED display versus an IPS LCD, the Samsung Galaxy A53 5G is going to get slightly better looking colors, and the viewing angles and brightness in general are going to be a little bit better. So if you're outside in the sun, for example, the A53 5G is going to be quite a bit easier to see than the Moto G Stylus 5G. But overall, despite their differences, again, I think both phones do have great displays, and you're really not going to go wrong with either of them. Now for storage, with the Moto G Stylus 5G, we're getting 256GB of internal storage with microSD card expansion, and with the Samsung Galaxy A53 5G, we're getting 128GB with microSD card expansion as well. Now keep in mind, there is another variant of this phone out there that has 256 too, but this phone in my hand does have 128, and I believe most phones offered by carriers will as well. On the other hand, with the Moto G Stylus 5G, this is the factory unlocked version, and I'm honestly not sure what carriers are doing, but I'm pretty sure most versions of this phone do have the same amount of storage. But that being said, for the purpose of this video, the Moto G Stylus 5G with 256GB does have a huge advantage here, with double the storage of the Samsung Galaxy A53 5G, which again, this one at least has 128. Now that being said, for the average user, I do feel like 128GB will be perfectly fine. I mean, that's personally the storage I have on my phone, and my phone being an iPhone 13 doesn't even have microSD card expansion, and I've had no issues whatsoever. And while I'm sure some of you do use more storage than I do, I feel like in general, again, most people will probably be fine with 128GB. But that being said, of course, if you are a power user, then the Moto G Stylus 5G might be a better choice for you. Now for security features, both phones have fingerprint scanners. With the Moto G Stylus 5G, it's right here on the power key, and with the Samsung Galaxy A53 5G, it's right here in the display. So definitely looks real nice and premium. And both phones also do have face unlock as well. But that being said, starting with the Moto G Stylus 5G, let's go ahead and give these fingerprint scanners a try and see how well they work. There we go, one more time. And there we go. And moving on to the Samsung Galaxy A53 5G. There we go, one more time. And there we go. So as you can see there, both fingerprint scanners are real fast and responsive. I was honestly especially impressed with the Moto G Stylus 5G. In case you didn't notice, I was being super lazy there and barely even put my finger on the fingerprint scanner, and it still opened just fine. But again, both fingerprint scanners are great. And remember, both phones do also have face unlock, so if you want to use that instead, you always can. Now taking a look at the camera setups here, these phones have pretty much the exact same design for the front-facing camera. With the Moto G Stylus 5G, this camera is 16 megapixels, and for the Samsung Galaxy A53 5G, this camera is 32 megapixels. Then on the back, with the Moto G Stylus 5G, we got a triple camera setup with a 50 megapixel main camera, an 8 megapixel ultra wide camera that also doubles as a macro camera, and a 2 megapixel depth sensing camera. With the Samsung Galaxy A53 5G, we got a quad camera setup here with a 64 megapixel main camera, a 12 megapixel ultra wide camera, a 5 megapixel macro camera, and a 5 megapixel depth sensing camera. So both phones do have really good camera setups. I honestly have no complaints here. They both have pretty much all the features, including an ultra wide camera and a a macro camera, but I would say as far as photo quality goes, the Samsung Galaxy A53 5G is a little bit better, maybe not by a whole lot, but if you want to take the best quality photos between the two, then the A53 5G will be the way to go. This is especially the case when it comes to video, because the Samsung Galaxy A53 5G can record in up to 4K in both the rear and front cameras, whereas the Moto G Stylus 5G can only record in 1080p. So overall, when it comes to photos and videos, if you're really taking a lot of photos, recording a lot of videos, and you want the absolute best quality between the two, I would say the Samsung Galaxy A53 5G will have an advantage, but if you're more of a light camera user, maybe you just like to get a few nice Instagram photos here and there, the Moto G Stylus 5G will still absolutely get the job done. Now as far as RAM and processor go, with the Moto G Stylus 5G we're getting 8GB of RAM with the Qualcomm Snapdragon 695 5G processor. With the Samsung Galaxy A53 5G we're getting 6GB of RAM with the Samsung Exynos 1280. Now keep in mind the A53 5G does have another variant that has 8GB of RAM, but again this one only has 6GB. And likewise with the Moto G Stylus 5G, again this is the factory unlocked version. I don't know exactly what all the carriers are doing, but I do have the Cricket version of the Moto G Stylus 5G 2021, and that one only has 4GB instead of the factory unlocked version's 6GB. So it is quite possible that some carriers do offer versions of this phone that have less RAM, but again, for the purpose of this video, this is the factory unlocked version and it does have 8GB. Now that being said, I did run Geekbench 5 benchmark tests on both of these phones, and with the Moto G Stylus 5G, we're getting a single core score of 622 and a multi-core score of 1928. With the Samsung Galaxy A53 5G, we're getting a single core score of 742 and a multi-core score of 1910. So honestly, between these two, you're really not going to notice a huge difference in performance. I've personally used each of these phones quite a bit now, and both of them run everything really well. So if you're looking for something for basic everyday use, like web browsing, social media, and stuff like that, and you're also doing a decent amount of stuff like mobile gaming, either of these phones are absolutely going to get the job done. Now obviously, they're not going to be anywhere near the level of something like a Samsung Galaxy S22 Ultra, for example, but again, in general, for mid-range phones, both of these phones are pretty fast and they have great performance overall. For the battery, both of these phones do have 5000 mAh batteries, so you can expect to get great battery life and longevity here. And with the Moto G Stylus 5G, this phone supports 15W fast charging, and the Samsung Galaxy A53 5G supports 25W fast charging. Now honestly, the difference here is really going to be kind of subjective, because on one hand, obviously, if you have a 25W fast charger, the Samsung Galaxy A53 5G will charge faster, but in general, if you don't have a really powerful fast charger, or maybe you just have your phone plugged in all day anyway, this is really not going to matter at all. But no matter what, both of these phones do have great batteries, and as far as that goes, you won't go wrong with either of them. In addition to this, both phones also have NFC, so if you like to make contactless mobile payments using tap and pay, you can do that with either of them. Another thing to keep in mind here is that with the Moto G Stylus 5G, as the name suggests, this phone does have a stylus, as you can see right here, whereas the Samsung Galaxy A53 5G doesn't. So if you do want a stylus, then definitely keep this in mind. But in conclusion, which of these phones is better? Now honestly, this is actually a really close call, because both of these phones are great and they're pretty much at the same level. But if I had to choose, I would say the Samsung Galaxy A53 5G is a little bit better. The reason being, this phone does have a higher quality display. With a Super AMOLED, you're just going to get better looking colors, and again, if you're outside in the sun, with better viewing angles, the A53 5G is going to be a lot easier to see. Now obviously, I might be a little biased because I live in a place where it's sunny pretty much all the time, but keep in mind, even when it's not sunny, if you're outside a lot or just in brighter areas, having a phone with a Super AMOLED display is definitely going to be easier to see. Aside from the display, the Samsung Galaxy A53 5G also has a much better camera and can record 4K videos, and the fast charging is a little bit better as well. But on the other hand, with the Moto G Stylus 5G, this phone really is not far behind, if at all, and it also has a really good display, and for an IPS LCD, the viewing angles are still pretty good. This phone is clearly much larger, and again, it has a taller and more narrow form factor, which does have its own advantages. The Moto G Stylus 5G also has double the storage with 256GB versus 128. The camera, while not being quite as good as the A53 5G, still will get the job done in most cases. It also has an equally fast processor, a great battery, and again, it does have a stylus, while the A53 5G doesn't. Another thing I just remembered while looking at the stylus is that the Moto G Stylus 5G does have a headphone jack, and the A53 5G doesn't. So if you do have wired headphones, you don't want to get an adapter, and you want a phone with a headphone jack, in that case, that's yet another advantage for the Moto G Stylus 5G. But in general, at the end of the day, these phones are both really similar, and they're definitely on the same level as far as features and performance go. So if you're looking for a solid mid-range phone with a good display, lots of storage, a good camera camera setup and a great processor, then both of these phones are going to be great options. Now once again, if you want to learn more about either of them, I will be linking to several other videos about them in the description, as well as some information about pricing and availability, because this is always changing. But this concludes my comparison between the Motorola Moto G Stylus 5G 2022 and the Samsung Galaxy A53 5G. If you enjoyed the video and found it useful, be sure to give it a thumbs up and hit that subscribe button. Don't forget to follow Kalippa's Tech on Twitter and Instagram, and as always, I will see you in the next video.